Oh, Esteban is here. Excellent. And this feeds right in to what I want to hit. Esteban Carrillo, what is happening, my man? How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
Hello, Jamal. Good morning. I'm doing well. How about you? How's everything?
I am doing well, man. Better that you're joining me. We're joined with Esteban Carrillo. He's an Ecuadorian journalist currently writing for The Cradle. He was previously with Telesur English. He covers topics in the Middle East and also in Latin America. So you are the person I would like to talk to today. We have had an interesting, on some level, it is a morning of ironies, ironic development. Al-Jolani, the man who like literally, like nanoseconds ago, had a $10 million bounty on his head, is at the White House and hanging out with the same people that at one point were hunting that same Golani. What's wild about this, he is playing basketball with CENTCOM. Again, the man that was originally hunting him is now playing basketball with him. The last time he was at the in the DC, he was hanging out with Petraeus. Petraeus was like, "Hey man, are you eating well? I worry about you so much."
Oh my! I forgot
like,
about that. You're right. I forgot about that.
He's like, "You're looking a little thin, buddy. You're doing
I'm
all
so
right."
worried about you. We're so worried about you. I
I'm so
remember
worried
that. Yes.
about you. I'm up at nights worried about you. I just want to make sure you're okay. And now he's hanging out with Donald Trump, shaking hands, glad-handing the president of the United States in a meeting that seems more like a military meeting than anything else, considering they had the god of war in that meeting, in addition to other military officials. Why is Golani here?
Oof. I feel like, a couple of things. First of all, I think it's just a sign of the times, right? A sign of this new Trump era, this new, like, post-genocide era, post-Gaza genocide era, in which, the U.S. empire is acting with absolutely no concern for the way things, for history, it's been 24 years and about $4 trillion and, well, about 5 million lives since the start of the so-called war on terror. And now you have the founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria sitting down at the White House, as you said, playing basketball with the CENTCOM chief, taking pictures with with this congressman, I forget his name, who's missing both legs. He lost them in combat. The guy who wears the IDF uniform to work. I mean, what an absurd moment to live in. This is kind of like at the end, right? It's taken about a year for Jolani to essentially shed his skin, become this Western approved leader. He really is, I feel like the prototype for the type of leader that the White House wants currently, not just in West Asia. I feel like in general, right? Like what they're doing in Venezuela, with Corina Machado and all of that. I feel like it's the same. It's the same idea. It's someone who is completely subservient to you. Like, look at Milei in Argentina. They have a prototype for quote unquote president. Truly a dictator. Nobody elected Ahmad al-Shara. He just declared himself president. He dissolved the parliament in Damascus and then just declared himself president. And since then, Syria, it's not exactly doing well. There's a rush of kidnappings. There's a rush of killings on sectarian lines. Israel's occupying the south. Turkey is taking control of the north. The U.S. says they're going to establish a military presence in a base outside Damascus. I mean, truly, it has been completely split, right? Like Syria as a nation, as the Syrian Arab Republic, doesn't exist anymore. And Sharia is central to all of this. And like I was saying, it's taken about a year for him to go, as you said, from a terrorist with a $10 million bounty on his head to head of state, no UN Security Council sanctions anymore. 14 out of 15 members voted last week to remove all sanctions on him. Now Syria is getting a waiver for the Caesar Act sanctions, which are, these very intense sanctions package that has essentially strangled the Syrian population. He's taking, he took a trip to the IMF. He met with the IMF head. So, Syria is just going to be about to be sunk in debt, sunk in war. And at the head of this is just this guy that is, just a few months ago, had a $10 million bounty on his head for terrorism, for chopping people's head off, for suicide bombings. It's insane. When Trump said, like, well, we've all had tough pasts. I mean, I never heard of Donald Trump sending a car bomb into a busy market street or anything like that.
Right. Here's just, I was pulling up the video as you were actually bringing this up. Somebody asked Trump, listen to his response to this, a tough pass. Yeah, because everybody's chopped the head off every now and then, right?
Every now and then, I guess.
Yeah, you can expect some announcements on Syria. We want to see Syria become a country that's very successful, and I think this leader can do it. I really do. I think this leader can do it. And people said he's had a rough past. We've all had rough pasts, but he has had a rough past. And I think, frankly, if you didn't have a rough past, you wouldn't have a chance. He gets along very well with Turkey, with President Erdogan, who's a great leader. Erdogan's a great leader.
Then during the
Tough pass, man. All of us have had tough pass.
Yeah, you said, who hasn't chopped a head or two in their past, in their youth?
Yeah.
So such youthful indiscretions.
Chopping off the heads. Yeah, that it's insane. What do you make of the military being in this meeting? I mean, like, for all intents and purposes, Donald Trump goes and has a conversation with Al-Jolani al-Sharar. And in this conversation, we are not privy to a lot of parts of this conversation. I mean, there was the opening, right? But you had military personnel, meaning this wasn't, hey, let's talk loans. And so you have to wonder, okay, well, Russia still has military presence in Syria. Israel has a military presence in Syria. The U.S. has a military presence in Syria. The U.S. is talking about expanding its military presence in Syria at the same time that Russia is currently in Syria. Mm-hmm. And you have to wonder, why on earth would the United States want Russia to remain in Syria? I can understand Golani's take that, hey, man, I need as many friends as I can get. This is a tough neighborhood. But obviously, the U.S. is not going to want the Russians in Syria. At least I don't think they are. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Why would they want that?
I don't think it's what the U.S. wants. I think it's what Israel wants. I think it's Israel that has been pushing for years for Russia to remain in Syria, inside of Syria. And Al-Jolani, yes, he's an agent of Erdogan, of the Turks, right? And of course of the CIA, of the US. So by default, he also answers to whatever the Israelis want. And the Israelis, they do not want a unified Syria. This is currently kind of where they're butting heads with the Turks, which is the Israelis want Syria to remain broken up. They want the entirety of West Asia to be broken up. They want everything to be divided by sects. This is why they're in religious sects. This is why they are inflaming tensions in Lebanon, in Syria as well, with the Druze and like coming in, taking land, etc. What they eventually want to happen in Iraq, they're already sending signals that Baghdad must disarm the Iraqi militias. So it's this idea that if you break up everyone along religious sects, first of all, you're going to have constant conflict. Second of all, you provide a larger justification for the existence of a Jewish state, right? Not a country based on law and on the equality of its people, but on the religious sect, on the on this religious identity. In this case, the Jews. But so I feel like this is why they want Russia, right? Because at the end of the day, the more actors are present inside of a country, the more instability this is going to continue to create. And to answer your questions, is Trump okay with this, with Russia, retaining its military bases there? I feel like he doesn't mind all that much,
Really? You really think that he doesn't mind? I'm sorry to interrupt. You really think he doesn't mind?
I feel like we would hear more about it if he did mind, because he's a pretty outspoken person, Donald Trump. He's not a man who keeps things under the vest for later use. He just tells you what he's thinking, and he really hasn't said much about the presence of Russia. And remember that Al-Jolani was in the Kremlin just a few weeks ago, right? So it's not just the US that is whitewashing this head chopper. This is like across the board.
Oh God, man, I get the feeling I'm going to get into a lot of fights this week with my Middle Eastern guests. Because there is a take that comes out the Middle East that the US is seemingly okay with this. I don't think the US is okay with this. I mean, keep in mind, part of the reason for overextending Russia in Ukraine was to overextend Russia in Ukraine. Uh-huh. And the whole fall of the Syrian government in and of itself was a fail for Russia. Like, they lost people in that fight. I mean, Russia, in the first time, Russia spent years, especially working with Iran in order to defend the integrity of Syria. It was widely seen as a loss for the Russians, for them to lose access to Syria.
Yeah.
Russia ultimately, as a realist country, makes a deal saying, all right, this is going to fall. We can't hold it together. So we are going to make a deal with the head chopper in order to allow ourselves to remain in the area. You can imagine the Brits, the French, the Germans, and I would think the Americans, who have had a big part in this policy of overextending Russia, is not going to be okay with them remaining in Syria when the entire point of it was, let's say, to remove the spaces by which Russians operate. If indeed the point of what America is doing is for primacy across the globe, or Western supremacy and primacy across the globe, why would they be okay with them remaining in Syria?
I wish I knew, to be honest with you. I feel like another possibility is this is just simply something that they're gonna return to, right? Like down the line. At this point, it's insane to believe, and I always bring it up whenever I get the chance. It's just like we haven't even reached the first year of Donald Trump's presidency. This is still month 10 or 11.
It feels like it's been years.
So I feel like there's still some room. There's still some room for developments, so to speak. I think what you're talking about, Jamal, like overextending Russia with the war in Ukraine, it has already paid dividends, right? You already have Russia in one way or another kind of disengaging, from West Asia, despite the fact that they are still pretty adamant about retaining their bases in Syria, and it seems the Syrian government is also pretty okay with this because, like I said, I think this is the Israelis. The Israelis are the ones who want the more players in Syria, the better it's going to be for them in the long run. But in the other hand, it does feel like Russia has stopped choosing sides, so to speak, right? And the big question that remains really is Iran. How far does this apply to Iran? Because the partition of Syria really was, kind of like a dead blow to the resistance axis. Did it work? Did it not work? We still have to see, right? I feel like the resistance forces in themselves are kind of trying to reconstitute themselves, trying to find a new, so to speak, axis, to gyrate around. But taking away Syria has really taken away that connectivity that existed, in particular with Lebanon and Hezbollah. Then now you have, for example, Israel is building a wall on the border with Lebanon currently. They're asking the Lebanese army to go and do into civilian homes and do house-to-house raids. Essentially do their work for them, right? To disarm Hezbollah. They're threatening war. They're threatening, a return to wide hostilities. And at the same time, they are claiming that Hezbollah is rearming itself via the sea, via air and sea, which makes no sense, especially in the reality that we live in. So that's kind of where Syria fell in, right? Like they cut off the flow of Iranian weapons and strategies to Lebanon. Syria became an ally of Israel, overnight, and now you have this spread of misinformation about how, regardless of anything, Iran, its tentacles are still reaching everywhere and whatever to incite war. So at the end of the day, that was their plan, right? Their plan was cut off Iran, but then in any case, still continue to manufacture consent so you can reignite a war. Because like I said, the idea here is to divide everything as much as possible. Syria is the game plan. Syria is the blueprint for what they want for the entire region. From Lebanon to Iran, they want to inflame divisions. They want Arabs and to start fighting each other, because that helps the Jewish nation, that helps their project of expansion and colonization.
The other thing I thought of when I saw Al-Jolani with Trump is this idea of using terrorists to accomplish objectives. Donald Trump has been seeking leverage against the Russians, like just in general, right? I mean, whatever agreements that they came up with in Alaska, Donald Trump's response to those agreements were effectively to try to have this kind of oil war, where he was attacking oil infrastructure, using Ukraine as a hand to do it. Obviously, Russia has responded with devastating, like just attacks that is, if not necessarily nip it in the bud, obviously has an overwhelming dominance in that regards. But this doesn't stop Trump hey, we're going to use tomahawks. And then Trump says, well, just let them fight it out. Let them fight it out. And Trump hasn't said much about it because as the government has been shut down, weapons haven't been going into the region. Also, this whole ceasefire thing is a non-starter, but he still is seeking some level of leverage. And if you're talking about using terrorists that are, let's say, in Syria, that makes up Jolani's goons, his goon squad and cohorts, can't those also be used against the Russians in various regions? And I guess my thing is that also a threat here? And is this also part of the reason why Russia wants to be in Syria also? Meaning they're aware of the people who've taken over that government. Despite Putin shaking the hand of Golani, he knows the creatures that are effectively under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a take on it.
I think it's an interesting perspective. It's very, very interesting because what you describe is completely true. Maybe, you make me think of the phrase, right? Keep your enemies close. Keep your enemies closer. And maybe that is what the Kremlin is thinking here, because you're completely right. In Syria, there's thousands of ISIS fighters just kind of waiting on the wings. Since the start of the Ukraine war, when Zelensky was calling for the international coalition, the Russian intelligence services were talking about how ISIS fighters were being essentially smuggled to the front to fight for Ukraine. Remember the Crocus Music City hall attack, which was blamed on, I think it was ISIS Khorasan that they blamed it on.
Yes.
Even though it ended up being like some Chechen militant. I don't remember exactly where they were from. But they were paid, right? So there's always that possibility, right? At the end of the day, there's always that possibility. They are U.S. commanders years ago, when they were talking about all of these ISIS fighters in prisons that are run by the Kurds in Syria. They were talking about an ISIS army in waiting, right? Knowing full well that this is something that they could dip back into, right? Like ISIS, the war on terror on the superficial level, it's a failure, right? You're talking about millions of lives lost. You're talking about trillions of dollars spent to essentially welcome Al Qaeda to the White House, right? Like they flew 2 planes into your major city, and now they are getting, all of the concessions and playing basketball with the CENTCOM chief. But then in reality, the actual purpose of it was absolutely successful, right? You created these armies of, as you said, goons, of just faceless goons that can be deployed at any point, at any time, that they answer to the demands of the U.S. and Israel. You partitioned the entirety of West Asia, or at the very least Syria, and are trying to do the same with the rest of it. You destroyed Iraq. You've encircled Lebanon and Hezbollah. You've allowed Israel to carry out a genocide and essentially face no repercussions, right? Like to this day, they're killing Palestinians in Gaza. They're taking people's homes in the West Bank, absolutely horrible images. And, the world essentially just went okay, that just, I guess it's going to continue to happen. So in that sense, and of course, the big spenders, right? The using taxpayer money to just continue to buy bombs and to destroy countries, and the way you launder money through war. This has all been successful. So I think at the end of the day, we're seeing kind of in a way, chapter 2, or maybe even chapter 3 of the war on terror, which is just kind of okay, now we're going to have an ISIS government, an Al-Qaeda government in Syria, and allow them to do what they do, right? Because it's not like these mad dogs are being kept on a short leash, right? Mm-hmm. They are doing as they please. They're kidnapping women. They are, Alawite and Christian women. They are killing the Druze. They're killing the Alawites. They are bombing Christian churches. The Mar Elias church attack a few months ago in Damascus, it was conducted by the Syrian security services, by the actual, Jolani's thugs. So now you have an ISIS state. And as you said, Jamal, maybe this is exactly why Russia wants to stay. They just kind of keep an eye on things, right? And make sure that there's no blowback in their direction. At this point, also, you have to remember that the Syrian currency is still being printed by Russia, right? They signed a deal for their currency to be printed by Turkey, but so far it's still being printed by Russia. So there's many things, right, that connect with each other. And I think, Jolani also would benefit from pleasing as many masters as he can, because at the end of the day, his grip on power is pretty tenuous. We just had elections. Syria just had elections in which essentially no one voted. No citizen was actually allowed to vote. It was to pick the parliament, right? And it ended up being with a third of the parliament literally handpicked by Jolani, and the other two-thirds picked by the equivalent of what would be an electoral college in the US, also named by Al-Jolani. So and you have to also consider that his fighters, right, like a large chunk of his fighters, I'm sure they're not okay with Giuliani, like cozying up with Trump in the White House. These people were waging jihad for more than a decade against the U.S. Like in Idlib, in the area where he was in control of from 2015 until last year, he up until just last year or 2023, there were protests in support of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, there was a report on Reuters over the weekend about how ISIS was trying to kill Shara, right? Like essentially the Spider-Man meme, right? When they point at each other, and because they're the same thing. But there is without a doubt discontent also, right? Like in the south, in the Druze areas, you have videos of Israeli troops arresting Syrian security forces, these Al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters, humiliating them. So at some point, this is gonna boil over, no doubt, right? Like Giuliani is in the honeymoon phase, but at some point that phase ends.
Yeah, I kept wondering if this was a poison pill, that there was no way Giuliani could keep this government together, and that whatever takes over after is going to be terrifying. I keep thinking that part and parcel to the reason that we are seeing Giuliani with U.S. defense officials is because they want to use him in a defense capacity, whatever, quote unquote, offense capacity. And whoever that is against, whether that is against Lebanon, whether that's against Russia, whatever rando enemy that they effectively want to use. And I'm glad you brought up something else. Donald Trump screaming that he is the defender of Christianity and is willing to wage a jihad against Nigeria in order to defend Christianity, or crusade against Nigeria to defend Christianity, as he shakes the hand of a man that is killing Christians and blowing up churches.
Yeah.
Just like, again, the irony jumps off the page.
Right? Like facts don't matter anymore. History doesn't matter anymore. We live, it's not even the post-truth era. It's just like the post-common sense era. At this point, it's just, Donald Trump, I feel like exemplifies that. And, one day he just picks different enemies. This whole thing with Nigeria, this whole thing with South Africa. Who's next?
Yes.
Right? Who's next on the chopping board? Who's next? Right now, yesterday there were reports that U.S. troops are training in Panama, in the jungles of Panama, which apparently, so they are going to try to invade Venezuela. What is this? The empire obviously overextending itself. And at the same time, just picking enemies left and right, and we'll just have to see exactly what's next, because what does year 2 of Donald Trump's presidency is going to look like? I honestly shudder to think.
Yeah, man, I nearly fell off the chair when you told me it's only been a year. I was like, what? A year? Right, you're right. It's only been a year. Yeah, It feels like it's been more than a year. He has been a hyperactive president in the exact opposite way, in the way in which he campaigned. Now, I got to be honest, I didn't believe what Trump was saying in this campaign. I tried to give a benefit of the doubt just in case I was wrong, basically saying, okay, all right, let's see if he ends the war. He has nothing really entirely invested. He hates the Europeans. Let's see what happens. I'm not going to take an issue. I'm not going to take an overt position on it. We'll see what happens. And then he gets in and he just becomes Joe Biden. Slowly but surely, believing, I can call up Vladimir, and Vladimir and I can just have a talk, and I can make everything all right. It's like, dude, this is not that war. We've been killing and dying for 3 years. We've lost hundreds of thousands of people. You really think that a conversation with you is going to end the war? You're out of your mind. But this is the farcical thinking that he came in with in regards to almost the world order, in a sense. One last question. Why would Israel want Russia in Syria? Meaning, I get why Russia wants to be in Syria. Like, it's this idea of they want to maintain their bases. They want to maintain power projection. It seems to be a very finicky position to be in, considering the U.S. is trying to put bases in Syria also. That looks very wild to me, but okay. Especially since the belief is that Erdogan controls Golani. I mean, and maybe that's the other thing, right? Having all of these masters. Who controls Golani? Is it Istanbul? Is it the United States? Where is his leash coming from?
I think it's still Istanbul. If I had to guess, I would say it's still Istanbul, because they propped them up for so long in Idlib, and
Yes.
of course not on their own, right? Like the U.S. was pretty instrumental as well. I think the least, this is why Donald Trump, whenever he talks about Sharia, also brings up Erdogan, right? When he talks about that last week, when he said we lifted the sanctions because Israel asked us to lift them, and then he also said because Turkey also asked us to lift them, right? And you also have the Gulf. I mean, Syria is also interesting, because it was a country with essentially no debt, right? With no national debt, and now the World Bank is talking that they need like 200 and something billion for reconstruction, which of course they do. They've been through a horrible decade plus long war. And now, Sharia, you have someone who is just more than willing to sign any check, any agreement that is presented in front of him. Why do the Israelis want the Russians in Syria? I mean, honestly, to me, first of all, is that this destabilization is just to make sure that there's as many players involved here as possible, rob Syria of as much of its sovereignty as it could ever hope to get. Maybe there could be a stopgap for any future confrontation for Turkey. At the end of the day, like I said, the Ankara has a different vision for Syria than they do than the Israelis do. Like the Israelis want Syria to remain divided forever and ever until they have the capabilities to essentially take it over to build their dream of greater Israel. On the other end, you have Ankara, who has been pushing for all of the factions and all of the religious sects to come under the central government, right? Like this is why the pressure has been so strong on the Syrian Democratic Forces, on the Kurds, to essentially disarm and join the army. And they've been pretty opposed to that idea for a while now, and they keep taking baby steps despite the pressure from Turkey, because Turkey, at the end of the day, what they want also is to essentially neutralize the Kurdish threat at their border. They want, they already got the PKK to announce their disarmament. They're talking about allowing PKK fighters to return to their homes in Turkey. And the SDF is an extension of this, right? So it's this, at the end of the day, you have two ideas, two visions for what Syria needs to be coming towards an eventual clash. So maybe, having the Russians and the U.S., because the U.S. is going to remain in Syria. The president who promised to leave West Asia, to leave the Middle East, is now saying, no, we're actually going to leave more troops. We're going to leave more troops in Damascus, and we're going to have troops in Gaza, and we're going to, where's next? Where's next, Trump? It's a reality. We are witnessing the birth of the new Middle East, of what Netanyahu, with his little visual aids that he takes to the UN and General Assembly, or what Condoleezza Rice said almost 20 years ago, and when she was talking about the new Middle East, we are witnessing its formation. And, it's still kind of like the dust still has to settle, because the pieces are still moving, and then we'll probably get a better view. But I think, it really is an idea for the Israelis to just make sure Syria stays as broken up as it can forever.
No, that's a really good point. Because my thing was like, why would the Israelis want the Russians there? Does Al-Jolani have any agency? And is that agency, meaning the Russians made the deal with Al-Jolani at the point before the war was even over with. I mean, before Syria even fell, they were effectively in a room making a deal with Al-Jolani, probably maybe even through the Turks, right? I mean, considering the influence that Turkey had. So that deal was in place, not to mention the debt that Syria owes Russia. There's that. I didn't know about the money printing thing, meaning there are reasons that the Syrian government may want the Russians there that go beyond just this idea of the Israelis. And there may be reasons that but you make a good point. Russia's a hedge against Turkish expansion, every bit as much as Russia's a hedge against Israeli expansion, weirdly enough, in a sense. It divides Syria up. Yeah, that's a good point, where the Russians just want to maintain their military base and their capability of projecting power in the region. That makes sense. Does Golani have any agency at all?
I doubt it.
I know that's a hard question. I know there's no way to know as an absolute.
Yeah, but I mean, like, from the way you look at it, I feel like he looks like a man who's very comfortable in his position. First of all, right? Like he's rocking, Armani, Patek Philippe on his wrist. Brand new everything. I mean, the man is living the life.
That's
right?
just Django, man.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched Django Unchained?
No, I
With
have
Jamie
not.
Foxx, he was a slave. Jamie Foxx eventually, the guy says, "Hey, you can buy anything in here you want," and Jamie Foxx buys this bright suit, and he's on a horse in this bright suit and new watch and everything else. He was a slave, right? So the
Yeah,
first thing he thinks is, "I'm gonna glam up."
that's
Jelani.
that's him. Yeah, like he's obviously, like a very self-absorbed person. You can see it. He loves the attention. Remember the interview I think it was a 60 minutes interview. He actually tried to flirt with the interviewer. It was it's pretty, if it wasn't so disastrous for Syria, it would be hilarious. But unfortunately,
Yeah,
it's not, because you are talking about an entire country. But
I'm still
there was
angry
a
with
report just a
Maloney.
few days ago also of Giuliani like talking to his generals and commanders, because they all arrived in like high priced vehicles to the meeting, and he was like, "Have you forgotten the tenets of the revolution? What are you doing?" Like Reuters always has these very funny reports, right, that are like half made up for sure. But Giuliani has an agency, I believe, under his own roof. In his house. Outside of that, on the geopolitical stage,
Under his
he's
own roof.
a pawn. He's a pawn, right? Like he's a worse version of Zelensky, right? A better dressed version of Zelensky, but an even less powerful, someone with even less say in what's next for his country, right? Because I don't even know if Giuliani actually sees Syria as his country, right? Like as a country. A few months ago, at the Cradle, when he first took power, one of our collaborators, one of our writers, actually spoke with someone who is close to Giuliani when the Alawite massacres were happening in March.
Really?
And what Giuliani reportedly said was, first of all, he's aware that the killings were happening, and second of all, he said, "Yeah, this is gonna happen, and it's gonna continue to happen for some time." Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. So, does he even have agency within his own ranks? Like if he wanted to stop the killings of religious minorities, could he? I don't think so. I don't
That's
think so, because he is, at the end of the day, a warlord. He's a warlord, an ISIS warlord, the founder of Al Qaeda in Syria. He was at Camp Bucca with all of the high-ranking members of ISIS. He fought jihad against the U.S. occupiers. He fought jihad against Syria. Like this man was as deeply embedded in the ISIS and Al Qaeda mentality as they come. So now, this transformation, he becomes a world leader. I highly doubt, like when he spoke at the UN, when he spoke at the COP in Rio de Janeiro, absolutely no one picked up any of his speeches. There was no news agency that said Syrian president said this, because the guy can't even speak. In Arabic, he stumbles over his words. So he's essentially just there to serve a purpose the purpose of his masters. Other than that, just the trim beard, the nice shoes, the Armani suit, and that's it.
Yeah, he's a puppet, basically an actor. He's playing a role. He has all sorts of people with strings around his throat, be it the U.S., Turkey, and by extension, Israel in some respects. Yeah. I am still angry. You say he flirted with the interview host. I'm still angry with Maloney, frankly. Look at this.
Oh my God.
I'm so angry at her. I'm so angry at her.
She's melting in her chair. It's insane.
Yes. She's like, "Oh God, you have such strong hands when you chop off heads. Show me how you do it."
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm still angry at her for that. Before I let you leave, let's hit Venezuela. Colombian President Gustavo Petro, he made a hell of a speech where he has been he has had a fire under him, to put it mildly, going after the United States, specifically the Trump administration, in regard to their policy of effectively murdering people in the Caribbean. And I'm trying to find the speech. He made this point about pedophiles who are lying all about, Venezuela and all about this region as they try to effectively invade. What about other leaders in the Caribbean? Have they picked up the mantle that Gustavo Petro has? I've seen speeches by Lula. I've seen speeches by, obviously, Petro. Maduro has been making speeches. Obviously, he's in the crosshairs of this. But Latin America has to realize that, for all intents and purposes, this is not about one nation. This is about, in some relation, China and Russian expansion, even Iranian expansion into South America. The U.S. being stopped at every turn in regards to either Ukraine, China, hell, even Iran. I mean, the decapitation strike in Iran failed. Meaning they're failing in their geopolitical objectives in various regions of the globe. And in their backyard, the actors to which they're failing with are in Latin America. And they seem to be overtly aware of the fact. I mean, obviously, the oil, the minerals, and everything else is there too. But do they realize that this is not specific to one country? This is specific to the region.
I think a few leaders do. I think like Petro does. I think Lula does. I think, of course, Maduro does. The Cubans, essentially the ones who are, on the side of what we would call this emerging multipolar world order. But for example, this weekend, the speech you're referring to, in particular, Petro was talking about, I think, former President Andres Pastrana, who at one point was traveling in the Lolita Express with Jeffrey Epstein about 20 years ago. So that's what he was talking about in particular. But it was during the EU CELAC summit, right? In which the declaration at the end of it, right, like of this Latin American bloc meeting with the EU, they declared in their declaration, they talk about Latin America as a zone of peace, right? And yet you have countries like Argentina, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Panama, Paraguay, and Trinidad and Tobago all refusing to sign that declaration, essentially refusing to say, yes, Latin America is a region of peace. So I think, I feel this is where we're standing right now. You have, over half a dozen nations essentially not willing to say we are a region of peace, which is just absolutely terrifying when you think about it. When you think about the mass buildup of ships in the Caribbean, as you said, the murder of fishermen in both the Caribbean and the Pacific, to the point in which poor fishermen are afraid to go out and try to earn their living. You have troops training in the Panamanian jungle to essentially prepare for an invasion of Venezuela or even Colombia. I think what Petro is saying in particular, it's extremely important, and I wish more leaders would take up this flag. I feel like Mexico is kind of flirting a bit with also with taking this position, but because of the proximity to the U.S., I feel like they just decide to be a lot more careful about what they say and how they act. But it's inevitable, right? Like it's right there. It's for all of us to see. There is no attempts at hiding it, right? Like Donald Trump is not out here saying like, no, like the Latin Americans have nothing to be afraid of. He's saying we're going to kill people. We're going to kill people and they're going to be dead. This is what the US president is telling us. So I feel like, more of our leaders really should like perk their ears up. And it's very shameful that you have all of these subservient nations, from Argentina to Trinidad and Tobago to Costa Rica, essentially disagreeing with the idea that Latin America is a zone of peace. Because what does that mean? Are you about to become the launch pads for attacks on other regional nations? It's truly, like a crucial moment for the region, and many, unfortunately, many nations are just unwilling to take the stance of, defending peace.
Why? I mean, is it from their point of view? They look at it as, well, we're not in the crosshairs. We're not under threat. This is about EU. Is that the way they're looking at it? I mean, explain it to me, because otherwise I don't quite get it.
I think it's, essentially you have nations that have hedged all their bets on the US, 100%, right? Like Trinidad and Tobago just a few months ago was saying, yes, Mr. President Donald Trump, come and bomb, the drug traffickers in the sea. This is completely justified. You have Argentina, which is, a couple of weeks ago, essentially voted not for Milei, but they voted for Donald Trump. They voted for the $20 billion that Scott Bessent and Donald Trump offered them as a bribe to allow Milei to win. You have Ecuador, which is at this point a U.S. colony in all but name, handed everything over to the U.S. You have Panama, which just a few months ago caught, they was it that they banned China from the Panama Canal, or they, increased the fare for them or something or other. They expelled China. They expelled China from there. You have Paraguay, another far right government there. El Salvador, of course, Nayib Bukele, the jailer of the empire, the man who's raking in cash by taking in these people who are being deported from the U.S. with absolute, not even a court order. You have Costa Rica, which is also, like a very sided with the U.S. Side. This is essentially, it's us versus them. it's what's happening. Donald Trump is saying we have to control the Western Hemisphere, and you're either with us or you're against us. And all of these nations are essentially saying, we're with you, master. We're with you because, we believe in your system, or just you are making so much money. Why wouldn't we be with you?
What do they get from the empire that allows this level of influence? Like Ecuador has become a drug colony at this point. God, man, it kills me what's been going on with Ecuador at this point.
Yeah.
It's like when you've been somewhere, you've seen and met the people at the location. It gives you a different feeling for it, as opposed to when you've never been somewhere, because at that point, people just don't seem real in that case.
Yeah.
But when you meet the cab driver, when you meet the hotel guy, when you meet the people, when you're playing checkers and chess with, when you are walking the streets and you have just random conversations, you get a sense of, you can never really know what it is to live somewhere, but you can at the very least get a sense of the people there.
Mm-hmm.
And to find out that, okay, these people are now under threat, when that wasn't what Ecuador was. Like the way it comes across as a radical shift in, let's say, the living standards of Ecuador. That kills me. Is it just that they get money, influence, clout? Is it the belief that they won't necessarily be attacked? What do they get from being part of this machine?
Well, first of all, money, right? Like when the IMF and the World Bank, like Giuliani, right? When he's going to the IMF, this money is not going to reach the Syrians' pockets. Whatever the IMF gives you in Ecuador, for example, is not going to reach the Ecuadorian people's pockets. It ends up, just being circulated among the oligarchy, going back to the US. It's protection, it's clout, it's this idea, that you are with the good guys, you are with the Democrats, with the whatever, like the defenders of freedom and liberties across the world. It's a racket. You're talking about a mafia when you're talking about the U.S. government currently. You're talking about a mafia, and I'm sure just like the mafia, they make you, so many good offers that you can't say no, right? They make you an offer you can't refuse. As you say, Ecuador is essentially right now just a cocaine producing and exporting country, not much else. Look at Peru, right? Like they had a government in place with about like a 2% approval rating for years now since they ousted Castillo. And what benefit is there to the people? Nothing. But for the politicians, for the people in charge, they're raking in the cash. At the end of the day, is that you're selling your homeland in exchange for cash. You're selling everything. You're giving everything away in exchange for, as you said, and clout, right? Look at Corina Machado. She's now a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Jamal. I can't wrap my head around that, right? So it's just about that, right? It's about retaining control of your country, no matter what happens to it, of its resources, and then you just keep raking in the cash.
Yeah, and that was Golani heading to the
IMF.
Bank. I'm sorry, the IMF, to get his loan, to get his check, to say, "Welcome, Mr. President, to the IMF," and he is obviously going to saddle Syria with massive amounts of debt. Any way you look at it,
insane.
Yeah, it's going to be a debt trap. So,
indeed,
he looks very content, very happy. As you point out, he doesn't seem like he has a care in the world. Very nice suit.
He's on top of the world. He really reminds me of Zelensky a few years ago. The same swagger.
Right. Well, Zelensky has a different swagger now. He's in the dark most of the time. Yeah. But yeah. Esteban, man, fantastic breakdown. Always love having you. You give a fantastic take in regards to your explanation of what is taking place, not just in the Middle East, but also in the Caribbean. And I thank you for it.
Thank you, Jamal, for having me.
For the audience, the Cradle. By the way, I always point this up. The Cradle is a fantastic organization. I don't know what the internal working looks like, but the work that you guys produce is awesome.
Thank you so much.
You have persistent hits on the various stories, a persistent breakdown on the things that are effectively taking place, and you guys do fantastic work. Esteban Carrillo, he's an Ecuadorian journalist currently writing for The Cradle. He was previously with Telesur English. He covers the Middle East and he covers Latin America. He's a great guest.
Thank you so much, Jamal. You as well.